I'm Microsoft MVP, which doesn't really mean anything other than I like to talk a bit. They look for people that evangelize the platform, that like to blog and do videos and help people. And all of those things are things that I like to do. And I enjoy some of that stuff. So I speak at conferences remember when we had conferences. So when there were in-person conferences, I'd like to speak at those, and then I do some blogging at my website there, flyingpolymath.com. My focus is in Power Automate. I am, a business user. I'm not a developer, and we'll talk about this stuff later. I'm not what I call a classically trained developer, meaning, I'll show some cards later, and you'll be like, this dude knows what he's talking about. And it's just smoke and mirrors. So I'm not a classically trained developer. I'm like maybe a power user, like I'm pretty okay with Excel. I can do some nested formulas and things like that. And a lot of that stuff makes sense to me. But there's nothing special about me. There's nothing that I'm doing that you guys can't do. The main message that I try and convey to people is, even though it may look intimidating, don't be scared. It's not. It's actually a lot of fun when we start getting into some of this stuff. And no matter where you're at, there's something for you to do inside the Power Platform. I have a whole separate presentation. I think that was the one I did last time. That there's probably a recorded video, but happy to do that one again. But as far as getting into the Power Platform and what things might look like for somebody who's new to that, right? But enough about me now. So one of the things I'm going to talk about today is, announcements from Ignite. Those not super familiar with Microsoft or the platform, there's a couple of events each year. Ignite's one of them, where Microsoft puts on a big show. A lot of laser beams and things like that, and they will run through. These are our big announcements on the roadmap. These are some really cool things that are a preview, and these are some things that are out there now. So I'll talk about some of that. I'll pick out some favorites that I think are really cool. And then my plan is to kind of do a quick demo. This is the cooking show part of not necessarily how to do a thing, but more along the lines of my thinking methodology, right? Like how I begin to do some stuff. And in there will be some 101 level stuff and maybe some 201 level stuff, because I don't know where everybody's at in this, and I want to kind of keep it interesting for folks. Anyway, there'll be some stuff in there as far as how to work through some Power Automate stuff, and what worked in my mission and what didn't. Okay. Any questions so far? I can't see the chat, so somebody yell.
Ed, we got a personal question. Can you speak Spanish? We got some Spanish 101 going on in the chat right now.
So I like to tell people no, I can't speak Spanish, and then let them talk about me and know what they're saying. So I understand that my confidence level isn't there, but I also speak a little Russian and Arabic and some other things. I really like languages, and I always try and get just a few sentences right with the accent.
I got muy bueno. How about that?
Yeah, bueno. That's perfect. That's perfect. Just enough to keep you out of jail, right? So that's what I'm shooting for. Okay, so talking about, it's a bummer I can't see the chat. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk through this stuff. I've got a bunch of links that I'll drop in the chat after, right? Or once I'm done presenting and I move into demo mode. But Microsoft has what they call, after Ignite, they have the book of news, which is, here's everything that we talked about, and here's the documentation that goes along with it. And so what I've done is a little screenshot of all of the Power Platform sections. You're going to see, like it says up here, deeper integration between the Power Platform and Teams. They got this thing with Process Advisor, which to me is, I don't know if it's super, I haven't really encountered, and maybe you guys at CSG or, other consultants in the group, Lucas, if you guys have seen people that have benefited from Process Advisor. But basically what it lets you do is document an existing process, a manual process, right? And then it says, hey, this could probably be automated. This could probably be automated. And I have yet, so every place I go into, I say, okay, what's the process look like? And I'd say, okay, here's 10 marbles. We should know where all 10 of those come out. And then what ends up happening most of the time is I end up with like 11 or 12 marbles at the end, and they're all in different places. So it turns out that like none of the people I work with actually have a process. They just have a series of exceptions. So I haven't really found a big use case for that yet, but it's there. AI Builder is pretty awesome. There's a lot of cool stuff with that. And in fact, I think that's on my list because they now let you build your own data model. So anybody that's doing kind of machine learning type stuff, you can bring in your own data model, and they've even got a new tool that is pretty cool. I'll bring that up in the demo too, called Lobe.ai. And right now, the only functionality in it is image recognition to help build a data model for that. But there's some other stuff that's coming that looks pretty cool. Some
Lucas, were you
intelligent.
gonna jump in? I saw you raise your hand for just a second.
Yeah, jump in, Lucas.
No
Okay.
worries. I was just gonna say we use the crap out of Power Automate on field service
Yeah.
due to actions that are needed all throughout the system and things like that. If a work order's in this state and stuff like that, then do this. Da, 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 da.
Yep. Yeah. So Power Automate is a super cool tool, and I didn't include the slide that says here's what Power Automate is, but I can run through that real quick if we want to do that too as well. Um, let's see what else. The licensing. Okay, so the reason this is called Ask Me Almost Anything is pretty much because everybody goes straight to licensing. I'm not going to answer your licensing questions. So luckily we have experts in the room that can talk about that stuff, but that's not going to be me. All right. So let's talk about my favorites. So these are some things, some of them are in preview, and some of them are kind of out there ready to go. But my favorite ones, and I'll add these in the demo, which are coming up. And remember, I'm going to drop a bunch of links in the chat after I'm done talking and can breathe. So comments, this is a big thing. If you've seen any of my stuff before, I would always tell people to put a compose action at the top of their flow and pretty much rename it release notes. And then they would, you could put in, here's all the things that I did this week, because it's an iterative process, right? You're going to build something and then you're going to make some changes and do some stuff. And it's good to keep track of that. Now, just like any of the other, like Word and Excel, you can add comments to anything Power Platform. So Power Automate, Power Virtual Agent, and Power Apps are some of the big ones there, where you can add comments. You can tag people. Now, the thing about tagging people is if I tag somebody, it's going to ask me, hey, they're not going to see this comment unless you share this flow with them. And so I'll demonstrate that. But what that does is that automatically shares the flow with them, which could introduce some exposure. Say if this person, maybe doesn't know what they're doing, or they want to make some changes or delete the entire flow, which might have been the thing that happened to mine. So that's the comment side of it. I'll demo that. I'm not going to demo the Canvas apps as mobile apps, but this is a huge deal. So what this means is if I built a Power App and I wanted it to do a thing, and I wanted to roll this out to people, they would have to, pretty much go to the Power Apps launcher on their mobile device, find the app that I had and click on that, and then it would go, right? Now, there's essentially the equivalent of an app store that Microsoft has that they can just get the app from there, and it could be available on my own personal company intranet store thing. So that's pretty cool. And I think that's a coming soon thing. I don't even think that's preview yet. I'm not sure. Maybe if there's a Power Apps person on the call, they can answer that. And then bring your own data model into AI Builder. That's a huge one. And I won't demo it, but I'll just show you the website, Lobe.ai. And basically what it does is it lets you, right now, it does image classification, which you've been able to do. I don't know if you guys remember or if you've ever seen John Lebeck's video from, was it like maybe 2 years ago, hot dog or not a hot dog, right? And that's the same thing. It's using the AI model to look at an image and say, this matches my library of things that look like this and are called hot dog. And so I'm going to therefore label this thing as hot dog, right? And as it does each of those, maybe it gets a little bit smarter and says, okay, this one is a hot dog or this one is not a hot dog. And so what this is doing is what Lobe does is it makes it super easy for you to, upload a bunch of pictures, say what those pictures are, and then it lets you dump that whole thing into your AI builder as a data model, which is pretty slick. And so there's a lot of demos out there already. Daniel Laskowitz has a great video on that. He's actually got a couple of series on that and how to do that, and it makes things that seem scary not so scary. The Lobe.ai stuff does, but this AI builder aspect, this image recognition aspect as well, has been around for a long bit. I think Vivek Bhavishi has one where he built a power app that would recognize, like when his wife says, "I need this makeup," he's like, "I don't know what this is." So she would hold it up, he'd take a picture, and it would recognize which one from her palette this was, and it would say, "This is the link to Amazon to buy this thing," and he'd just click on it and buy it. So there's a lot of cool uses for that kind of stuff that also exist in the business world. And it's accessible for folks like you and I, power business users that maybe aren't necessarily developers, right?
And Ed, I got a question here real quickly,
Yep.
which I feel like I know what your answer is going to be, but Fernando said he heard another UG session about somebody saying to stop using Power Automate and instead use Azure Logic apps. Now, how does that make you feel, one? And two, I think it kind of hits on the last piece where he said, well, do you have to be a pure developer to be able to do this? No.
Yeah, so from the Power Automate side, to answer the second, I'll work in reverse order, right? So from the Power Automate side, no, you don't have to be a developer. And actually, it works on both sides. So I'm saying you don't have to be a developer. You can be a business. There's a lot of things you can do without writing any code. There's a lot of things you can do that, like, let's say you can do a complex like VLOOKUP in Excel. There's a lot of things at that level. There's a lot of stuff that you can do in Power Automate. And then, going full dev, right? There's a lot of stuff that developers will lean on Power Automate to do just because it's easier or better, or it meets it's another tool, right? So it's okay to use that. As far as the difference between Power Automate and Logic apps, like I don't know what the total difference is. I know there's a lot of people that have write-ups on there as far as here's what you can do here and here's what you can't do here. I don't know Logic apps, but I do know Power Automate, right? So that's the hammer that I use to bang on all the nails that are my problems, right? So as far as how does it make me feel when somebody says you should be using this thing instead of that thing, if they're not leading that statement with a question of what are you using it for, then it's probably not the right solution, or at least give it some more thought, right? Because anybody that says, no, you don't want that, you want this thing, without asking you, how are you using it? What are you doing with it? What's your skill level? What's your comfort level? What are all these things? How do they play in? Then they don't have a clear vision as far as who you are and what your needs are. So where are you finding the expertise to tell me what it is I should be using, right? Use the thing that works for you. Use the thing that gets the job done, right? And that's part of my other speech with Power Automate is as long as you can get from A to B, don't worry about what's in the middle. If it's not super pretty and it takes forever to get there, the main thing is get from here to there, and then we can start straightening this line and making it look smoother, right? So use the thing that's right for you. If you want to use Logic apps, cool. You want to use Power Automate, cool. Whatever gets the job done, whatever works best for you, whatever you can manage most easily and suits your need the best. Okay. Any other questions?
Nope, I think we're good.
All right,
Thank you.
moving on. Moving on. Okay. So tools, demo, and questions. So I'm going to start with some tools. Now, again, I'm not a classically trained developer, but there are some developer tools that make working with anything, really. I mean, anytime you're dealing with lots of data, sometimes it makes it easier to look at the stuff. There are some things that we can look at they're going to make things easier. One of them. So one of the things is Microsoft Graph Explorer. I'll walk through that in a minute. And that's just basically an easy way to hit some of the API endpoints that you wouldn't necessarily be able to hit from Power Automate. So any of the Power, and we'll talk about this too. And you guys check me, all right? If I'm too basic, then let me know, right? If I'm not basic enough, let me know. I'll try and speak at a comfortable in between level. But if I say something that just like is either completely boring or off the charts, like I have no idea what you just said, let me know. But Graph Explorer basically lets you hit the API endpoints, and that's all connectors are. So a connector inside Power Automate, Power Platform, Power Apps, and even Power BI. All of those connectors are essentially API endpoints that the software provider has constructed and packaged up. Somebody has packaged up and said, here's an easy to use connector, right? So if you've used Power Automate or any of the Power Platform tools and you've connected to something and you've looked at a trigger or an action, that's essentially an endpoint with some stuff boxed up that passes the data along and sends some stuff back, right? Graph Explorer is kind of like one step behind that. It's not completely the back end, but it's one step behind that nice graphical user interface to get to that API data. And we'll talk about what that data looks like. And that's the next tool is Microsoft Visual Studio Code, also another free tool. And all I use it for as a non-classically trained developer is to neaten up the garbage that I'm looking at. So a lot of times I'll look for certain, like I'll get a bunch of data from Power Automate thing. Like I'll say, when this happens, go grab all of my events in Outlook, and it ends up being a ton of data that when I click on Power Automate to look at it, it's in Notepad and it's gross, and I don't know how to read any of it, and so I dump it in Visual Studio Code, and it basically makes the indents and the colors and everything pretty, so I can kind of sift through and pick out kind of intuitively what it is I'm looking for, and I'll show you what that looks like too. And then of course YouTube, right? We were just talking before this thing started that the word Bing, sorry Microsoft, is never going to be a verb. Nobody's ever going to say, hey, Bing this. So I was saying, just Google how to do this thing, and chances are you'll end up on a YouTube video. Somebody has done this. There's no problem that you're going to bump into that somebody hasn't, really hit before. And as long as your search is, in the ballpark, you should be able to find a resolution pretty quick. And this is another part of my talk is basically when I first started with the Power Platform, there was nothing. There was not a lot of people to go to. Is there more questions? No? Okay. There wasn't a lot of people to talk to, and so the idea of getting help was a little intimidating because it was basically myself and people like me, and then Microsoft, right? And then they'd ask a bunch of questions. I have no idea what they meant. So nowadays, there's a lot of people out there doing stuff. They're all at different levels, and I encourage everybody that's out there, no matter where you're at, as you're learning, as you're doing, as you're building, document it. Start a blog, do some videos, do something, because there's probably somebody in your area, in your universe, somewhere around you that could use your help, or at least hear how you solve the problem, and it may help you out. So I encourage everybody to kind of do that.
Or come present at your local user group.
Or come present. And seriously, there's nothing. I think somebody really smart said that the best way to learn something is to teach it, right? And so that's kind of why we're here. Yeah, we're way outside of my comfort zone right now. But for me, it helps me learn this stuff, and in addition to adding some other skills. So it's always good to kind of like stretch just a little bit, get on some of the boards, the community boards, and answer somebody's question. Don't worry about getting it wrong. It's just so supportive. Everybody out here is out to do some good, and we can definitely use your help specifically.
A quick
Okay.
question we
Yeah.
got in the chat, Ed, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
I thought this was a good one. Asking, so Power FX that came out
Yep.
not too long ago, but does the Power FX support Power Automate expressions? And have
Yep.
you ever used Power FX?
So that's actually brand new somewhere. I haven't used PowerFX, but there, here we go, right there, 617, open source and developer collaboration for Microsoft PowerFX. So what they've done is they've moved PowerFX to a Git repository. And so you can actually compile that and throw that into, your own desktop and use that stuff. My understanding is it's basically, and whoever asked that question, correct me, right? Because I'm, like I said, outside of my comfort zone. But it basically translates some intuitive commands into some less intuitive commands. So it makes it easier for you to write stuff. I haven't used it yet, but it is incorporated and there is a developer collaboration and there is a Git repository on that. When I post the link for the book of news, you can look specifically for that. And that'll have all the information there. Hopefully that helps. Yes, no, good. Good enough?
That's perfect. Thank you.
Okay, my pleasure. So moving on. So here's the basis of the demo that I'm going to I'm going to zip through, mostly because my focus is not necessarily on the thing that I have to do. And this is part of my other talk, right? So when the old paradigm, whether you were learning dynamics or, something like whether it was, the CRM side or the F&O side, the AX days, you'd go to the conferences and somebody would say, here's how you do this thing, right? And the only reason you would go to that class is if you had to do that specific thing, right? With the Power Platform, it's a little bit different because now the focus is on the ingredients, right? It's not necessarily about how do I make this specific dish, but what ingredients did you use? Because I can probably take some of those ingredients and use them in my own dish. Once I understand what the flavor profile is, once I understand, is it spicy, is it sweet, is it savory, is it salty, whatever, what's it going to add to my dish? So, as speakers and as attendees at conferences and classes and things like that, we should be paying attention, not necessarily to the final thing, even though my objective is send a reminder to meeting attendees to respond, but maybe pay attention to how I approach it, because maybe you don't want to send a reminder to those meeting attendees. Maybe what you want to do instead is make sure that, everybody in the meeting has responded. I don't know. Or maybe you want to send them a thank you email that says, hey, thanks for responding. Go do this thing. Or you want to update a report, or you want to do something else. So it's not necessarily about the finished dish, which is, the send a reminder to meeting attendees, but it's more about the ingredients. And also in this case, we'll talk about the methodology and the approach, right? In this particular example, somebody raised the question. This is an actual question that somebody asked at my work probably about 2 weeks ago. They were moderately familiar with Power Automate, and they said, hey, I schedule these meetings, and a lot of people say, hey, I never got the invite, or whatever, or I forgot and I never responded. So he says, I want to go through and look at my meetings for the day and see who hasn't responded, and then send them an email reminder, right? So the pieces that I need from that, as far as I need a list of meetings that this person created, and then I also need to know who was invited, and I also need to know their response, okay? So we'll talk about some of the issues, and now is the part where I get to see all the chatty stuff, because I'm going to switch over to demo mode. Now I can move this window. Just doesn't want to go away. All right. And just so you know, too, for those that didn't know this, if you grab an active window and shake it, it minimizes all the other ones. Weird, right? So if you're doing a demo and you're trying to move something and you move it too quickly, it's going to think, oh, you want to focus on this thing. It'll get rid of everything else. Okay, so let's talk about connectors. So here is, if I, should I have the conversation as far as what is flow, or are we too deep into that now?
I mean,
Guys?
I think you can give it the high level.
Yeah, so
Give us your elevator pitch.
okay, yeah, there isn't really. I'm not great with those. So what Power Automate is basically, an ability. It's a workflow automation tool, right? There's there's a desktop version that lets you do stuff on your desktop. But then there's also, you know, the cloud stuff, which is what I like, right? And that basically lets you connect to multiple different applications, and you can do things like when somebody sends me an email, and it matches this criteria, I want to create a trouble ticket or a customer service ticket inside Dynamics, you know, service, or, you know, Dynamics CE service, whatever it is you're using, right? And it doesn't necessarily always have to be a Microsoft product. Right now, I've got one where it says, you know, when somebody sends a text message to this phone number and it matches this criteria, add a record in a HubSpot. Or, you know, if somebody sends a text message with this other criteria, you know, create a record in this other application. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a Microsoft connector. In fact, there's over 500 different ones, and you can see, you know, obviously the popular ones are listed up here. All the icons for some reason are defaulting to this red thing. Oh, here we go. Those are all the independent, yeah, publisher connectors. That's why they're all red. But here you can see there's over like 500 of them here, and it's crazy. I mean, so I had, just so you know, I like, one of my favorite ones is, you know, I had a German Shepherd. She recently passed, but you know, I had those little flick buttons. I don't know if you've seen these, but they're little, you know, buttons that you can program to do different things. I created one so that I just carried it around in my pocket, and every time we took her out in the front lawn and she did her business, I double click the button and it would kick off my sprinklers in the front lawn, because, you know, I don't want to have to like go get the hose, rinse things down or whatever. And I'd like my lawn to look kind of nice, and it would just run it for like, you know, I don't know, 3 minutes or something. It's just enough to wash away the dog stuff. But I mean, there's all kinds of stuff that you can do, business, personal, whatever, to do this using all of these connectors. And here you can see, like, I just scrolled through 3 pages and I'm just now hitting the B's, right? So there's a ton of stuff you can do. Excuse me. Again, don't be intimidated, right? It may seem like a lot. If you're coming at this for the first time and you're seeing all this stuff, just think to yourself, is there something that I do like repetitively and I do it a lot, right? Does it take up a lot of time? Does it feel like it can be automated? Then it probably can, right? And so then you start asking the next questions. Okay, what applications are involved? Is it regular? Am I doing this every day? Like, is it on a recurrence? Like, what's the thing that basically says, hey, you need to do this thing? And then what's the do this thing part, right? And another way to explain it is, if you've ever used apps like, or websites like If This Then That, I mean, their name says it all, right? If this happens, do this thing. And that's exactly what they're built around. Zapier is another one that does the same kind of stuff. Zapier has a really cool UI, but they don't have the same flexibility, I don't think, that as Power Automate does. But I bounce between them both because there's some things that one can do that the other can't, right? Don't tell Microsoft I said that, please, because I don't know if you caught on the About Me slide, but Microsoft MVP, which basically means I'm Team Microsoft all the way. That you can tell them
Yeah.
is the Team Microsoft part. Share
I,
that.
I
Yeah,
think
you
it's
can.
worth also mentioning, you know, how Power Automate's kind of growing. I mean, I'd say in the past year, you know, to becoming a full-on enterprise, like, robotic process automation platform.
Yep.
You know, like, they
Yeah.
were getting off of desktop, doing more in the cloud, you know, being able to take your like legacy, archaic applications and being able to layer over on top of it, though, these like automatic processes. So, you know, we're seeing that growth, and it can be as simple as you said, the if this then that, or it can be
Mhm.
as complex as, hey, go automate this complex, you know, branching logic on this, you know, legacy application, so we don't need to go hire 10 people to go sit there and, you know, plug away.
Yeah, that's a great way to look at it, because and here's the reason why that is so awesome, right? One, it lets you build a you know, a straw man, or it lets you basically build a proof of concept that says, okay, you know what, I feel like this is possible. You know, but if I hire those 10 developers to do the thing, it's going to cost an arm and a leg just to find out if it's possible or not. Build your proof of concept in Power Automate, and then if you want to, like, if it's not quite finished in your mind, then bring in somebody to say, hey, make this real, right? Make this do something. But in a lot of times, what you'll find is Power Automate does a lot just on its own, and you can do a lot with it. There's a ton of stuff. And then the other thing that is kind of new, so I zipped past them, But all of these independent published connectors are letting people take these APIs from other websites and create Power Automate connectors in there, so that you can do, you can do things like, check the weather and do stuff in Discord, but you can have some fun, because I think Daniel Laskowitz did this one. Hang on. There's the Chuck Norris thing where you can, get these Chuck Norris sayings. There's another one that's dad jokes somewhere in there. Where is it? Here we go. Icon has dad joke. So, I mean, there's silly things in there, but essentially what people are doing, what Power Automate is doing now, is it's letting people package up a connector from an existing API. And so that what they've done, remember I said it's just an API endpoint, but they packaged it up. So now I can say, get a random Chuck Norris fact, or let's search for a Chuck Norris fact, right? Now, I've never touched this connector before, right? And I have no idea what it looks like, what I'm going to get when I do this, but just for fun, for the people that are new, let's create one just to see what happens. And what I'm going to do is, when you go to create them, it kind of walks you through the process, right? So it asks you, are you going to have something that's automated, meaning when something happens in this application, go do something over here? Is it going to be instant, which is one I'll choose? Is it going to happen on a regular basis? So you want it to run every day, every minute, every whatever month, then it'll do that. And then these other two we're not going to talk about, but those are the desktop stuff, meaning it's happening locally, or business process flow is basically kind of like a sales stagey type thing, where all three of these things need to complete before it can move on to the next stage, right? I go the other way, left to right. So what I'm going to do is I'll just create this, automatic, or this manual flow. I'm going to click on skip just to kind of get things going. And we're going to kick it off with a button, which basically means I'm choosing when this thing is triggered. And I like that Chuck Norris thing. So we're just going to grab that, and we're going to get a random Chuck Norris fact. Yep, it was Daniel Laskowitz that did that. So great guy out of the Netherlands, a lot of fun. And he's just grabbing, Chuck Norris stuff. And you can see that there are different categories that I can choose. We're going to skip the explicit one because I know Daniel a little too well. And then we'll go with music and then save. And so keep in mind that what it's going to, because Power Automate is essentially kind of like the back end stuff, it's just going to present some ugly looking data, and then it would be up to me to do something more presentable with it. But we're just going to test this out and see what that ugly looking data looks like, right? And so here you can see that I was able to get the random Chuck Norris fact. Category was music, and of course the value that it's sending is Chuck Norris can touch MC Hammer. For the kids in the audience, MC Hammer is an artist that had a song back in the 80s called You Can't Touch This, and exciting fashion that went along with that. But what I could do is I could drop this into an email. I could take this and put it, into, I don't know, whatever you wanted, anything really. I could turn this into a Bing search if I wanted to. But I mean, it doesn't just have to be one application. I could add this to a Dynamics thing. Like, there's just a lot of different things we can do with this stuff. Maybe in one of the other presentations, I'll do something super complex and not delete that flow, so that way you guys can see it. But I just want to show you how easy it is to create something, and how fun they're making it with giving everybody access to creating these connectors. Okay. How we doing? 6 o'clock? Okay on time so far?
You're doing great.
Any questions while I'm rolling?
Let's see. Fernando mentioned, I thought you just said the compose is the first action, but my guess is because you start from the connector, you don't have to do that.
Okay, so here's what, Fernando, to answer your question, and this will lead me into a great reminder for one of the things that I did. So as a best practice, right, what I used to tell people, and I actually learned this from an event here in Portland. I was visiting and somebody was speaking, and they said this is what they do, and I'm like, that's a great idea. Is to add a compose right after my trigger, right? And And it's funny, I'm going to show you this and I'm going to say, don't do this anymore. Okay. But what a compose is basically just a box, right? So I could put in a formula, I can put in a value, I can put in a dynamic thing. So like if I move this, see if I can move it down here. So if I move this down here, I can drop in that Chuck Norris value. And so now that, that thing that came up in the last run that Chuck Norris can touch MC Hammer, that would just show up here and I could use that someplace else, right? But what Fernando's talking about is I said at the beginning, add a compose at the very top. And then what I would do just as a best practice is I would put the year and then the date and, in here, and then I would say add G, and then created flow to do this thing, right? Usually what I would put, my very first thing would just be hello world, right? Just like, so that I knew on this day I created this thing. And then let's say, a month later, I come back and I say, oh, I changed this variable, to be something else, right? And then I would rename this thing. Oops, sorry, got ahead of myself. I would rename this thing and call it release notes. And what this was is this was a favor to me, future me, and a favor to, everybody else in the world so that they knew what was going on in my head when I built this thing. Because you can imagine, as you get something that's more and more complex, right? It's hard to remember or hard to know, why did I do that? Like, that's really weird. Microsoft listened. They said, you know what, Ed, that's a great idea, but maybe not the best way to do it. So we're gonna do you one better, as they often do. They take my idea and they said, now we can just add comments. So Fernando, we don't need this compose step anymore. I'll get rid of it. And now what I can do is say new comment up here, and it brings up this window, right? And so here I can say, added the Chuck Norris thing, because it was right, and that's it. And so I can add some reasoning here, and then somebody else could come in here and do some stuff if it was shared. Now, if I wanted to get somebody's attention with this, then I would just mention them just like I do in any other app, right? Just like I do in Teams, I do in Word, Excel, whatever. And so I'm gonna we were talking about Ashley before, so I'm gonna tag her and say test of comment. And so I could tag her and she would get a thing that shows it. And what it'll come up, it'll yell at me and basically say, hey, she's not going to see this comment unless you share it with her. All right. And so I'm going to do share and notify. So she'll get a little thing that basically says, hey, this thing was shared with you. And then when she comes in here, she'd see the comment and know exactly what was going on. And she could answer my questions in line right here. Right. And if I had other steps in here, so let's add, I don't know, some Excel stuff, delete a row, right? And then I could have a comment here, and you could see it was tied to that other step there, right?
Quick question, Ed. Pranam
Yep.
asks, can I strip out the comments when I export the Power Automate flow and share it with another user, or back up to like archive collections?
Good question. I don't know. Here's my thought on that. The notes have to be stored someplace, right? So depending on how creative you are as far as where this stuff is stored, because a lot of this stuff is going to be stored as JSON someplace, right? And it's going to be probably somewhere in the Dataverse. So it would just be a matter of finding what that looks like and then grabbing that out. So that's a great question. And if you guys, Greg, well, actually, I'll just look at the chat later. I'll dig into that and see if I can find anything on that. And then just respond in this Teams. We'll have, I mean, this will persist, right? The Teams chat will persist after the meeting.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Should be.
So I'll just I'll leave
only
something
for
in the
the
chat.
people that are invited. Sorry, everybody that's a guest is going to get kicked out.
Boo. Okay, so
for like best presenters.
Okay, so
maybe follow up with you on Twitter or email.
Yeah, that's a good idea. So we got my Twitter handle up there, and it's also at the end. So follow up with me in a little bit there, and that'll be my reminder to check into this because, like I said at the beginning, I'm a little flighty. There's a lot of stuff going on, so I may forget. Right.
Okay.
So where were we? So let me just make sure I covered some of the stuff that I was going to talk about. And I will drop in, actually, you know what, since everybody's not going to have access, let me drop in the chat stuff that I mentioned before, right? Let's go here. Well, let me move this. There we go. Now I can see the chat stuff. Oh, thanks, Tina, for the Twitter stuff. Okay, so first link coming your way is the Book of News. And then now we've got some other links. Here is the comments. Oh, no, that was the mobile app, sorry. The comments I demoed. The second link is the basically translating a Power App into a mobile app. And so that's kind of fun. And then here's the data model link. And then also, okay, so I want to talk about this one too as well, the Loveai one. And this is a download, so I'm not going to like walk through the whole thing, but I did want to show you guys, you know, what the intent is behind it as far as if you're building your own data model and some of the things you can do. So here you can see, you know, what is happening there. And there's actually already a kind of connection for this inside Power Automate. So I could basically throw up a picture inside Power Automate. It feeds it to an image recognition thing on the Microsoft side, and it'll basically analyze the picture and judge what my expression is. And it'll try and guess the gender, which I don't know if that's a little dated or if they've made any updates with there. And as far as whether or not like you're wearing makeup, it shows up in the JSON as makeup and yes, no. So it gets a little judgy sometimes, but I'm still total team Microsoft. So here's the image classification, what that looks like. You upload a bunch of pictures, you tell it this is what it is, whether or not it correctly, and then every time you keep loading more stuff, it basically gets a little bit smarter. And then somewhere down here, yeah, so here are the templates, right? So this one is available now, the image classification. Object detection is the one that my friend Vivek used when he was doing the makeup one, right? It says, okay, what is this? And he had trained it, his data, using his data model to say, okay, this is an eyeliner, and here's the correct eyeliner that your wife uses, order this. And then data classification for you Power BI people. That one's going to be really fun because that will let you take, you know, an uploaded, I'm trying to think of this, like basically if you take a PDF and it's a table, it'll let you identify what the columns are, what the rows are, and then it'll take that and translate it into tabular format. Pretty strict. And then from there, you can take the dynamic stuff and do stuff with it. So you could grab stuff on the fly and do math with that as well and load it into Dynamics or, you know, whatever, SAP, any number of things using Power Automate. So that's a hoot. And let's see, okay, nothing there, nothing there. Okay, so here, all right, so let's talk about the demo problem that I was talking about, because that'll lead into some of these other links, right? So in my thing, the guy wanted to get a list of all of the events that were happening and send meeting requests to everybody that had not responded, right? And so let me bring this over real quick, just, you know, in the back end mode, so you can see, get a refresher as far as what it is, and you can see my little notes. I did that, talked about the ingredients, and then we'll talk about that. Good. Okay. So, and then what didn't work? And so you can see the issues that I encountered that I'll walk through, but basically all of the out of the box connectors showed me who the attendees are, but it didn't show what the responses are. And I'll show you why Visual Studio Code was so key in figuring that out, right? And then the Graph API, which is the kind of other tool that I was showing you, gives me the details I want, but requires a premium license for HTTP. And authorization is a pain, but maybe there's a workaround, right? So I'll tell you a secret here for anybody that wants to do Graph API calls. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to bounce over to my partially cooked dish, right? And so here I've got a manual trigger. that basically just means I'm going to push a button and it's going to do a thing. And then I've got 3 different actions that are all kind of going after the same thing, right? I'm trying to find out, what meetings are there and which ones I have done anything, like which ones where I am the organizer. And then finally, what are people's responses, right? And so get events was my first choice. And what that does is that just gets all the events, whether they're mine, whether they're somebody else's. You can see under advanced options, I can add some filter stuff in there. Like, let's say I'm trying to narrow down the date using a language called OData. And then I can say, just give me the top 5. So there is some fun stuff that I can do there. Then there's the one that says, okay, just give me one specific event. Here's the event ID. I know that. So give me the details on that. That was the next thing I tried, was basically saying, okay, from this list, get me the details to see if that did that. And then finally, calendar view of events just basically gets you the same view that you would see in your calendar, but I gave it a date range, a start date and a start time, just to see if it would get me anything else. All right. Now, if I run these, and it'll take a little bit just because the first one's kind of a big one. Let me drink some water. How's everybody doing? Are we tracking okay? I can't see
Everybody's
anything.
still awake?
Okay.
He's still there. I know Ed's got a mesmerizing voice. Oh, he's got a thumbs up.
Guys are too kind.
Bing it on, Ed.
Bring it.
Yeah, bing it on.
Bring it on. Nice. Okay, so here's one of my reasons why I like Visual Studio Code, or really any JSON editor. Okay, so there are online versions of that. In fact, let me show you one of those. Online JSON formatter. Formatter is a good one too. Let's see who comes up. Okay, so JSON formatter. I don't know if this is the one that I've used before, so I'm going to leave this guy up, but I'm also going to show what Visual Studio Code can do. Because it's a free app, and why you would want to use one over the other. Okay, so here's my get events, right? Remember I said this is the one that's going to go get everything, right? And so the outputs are too big. Remember our Chuck Norris guy over here, where it pretty much just had the one line. This is more than one line, right? So it just basically says click to download, and then just says here's all your stuff in this gross kind of textual manner, right? So like so out of this list, find me, where I'm the organizer, right? It's kind of gross. So I can, dump this into this JSON editor thing. I haven't used this one before, so I might be doing it absolutely wrong. And then format, and then you can see the difference left to right, right? So this is gross. This is a little bit easier, right? This looks a little bit more structured. I can see what's going on. I can start to pick things out. Now, here's the thing. This guy is online. So if I'm dealing with any kind of sensitive data, like maybe there's a HIPAA concern or privacy or whatever, it's kind of out there. Like there's a possibility that somebody could be malicious. Thankfully for me, they now have my email address, and what are they going to do? Send me more spam? Bing it on, right? Bing it. But what I often do is I'll come over here to Visual Studio Code, which is a free app, and I'll do the same thing. I just dump that whole thing in there. Visual Studio says, oh, that's all one line, obviously. But then I hit F1, and then one of my options is Beautify JSON. I use it so much that it's right up here at the top, but you could just start typing it and it would pop up. And so it does essentially the same thing. Let me go back here. Now you can see the same stuff. And so this is like, from what I understand, right? Because I'm not an actor, but I play one on TV. I'm not a developer. But this is, from what I understand, this is the world they live in, right? And it kind of looks like it, right? It looks a lot like gibberish if if you're unfamiliar with this, but then you start to see things that make sense, right? So like I'm looking for the meetings that I've created, right? And so I start scrolling down, and then I see, oh wait, here's organizer, right? So maybe I could do a filter that says, okay, where the organizer is equal to this, right? Or there's another one that says, I think there's just a flag that says is organizer. And then I could just set that to true, right? So you've got a couple of options based on the data, but I wouldn't be able to tell from this nonsense or from this nonsense, right? So that's why I use, Visual Studio Code or some kind of editor that makes it a little bit prettier, because even as a non-developer, I can still start to infer, some of the things, and see, hey, Carol, there's our meeting. And I can start to infer some of the things that would maybe not make sense to me when I'm looking at it in this format, right? So that's Visual Studio Code. But now, okay, going back to our demo problem, right? I'm looking at my attendees, and so here's a test one. This is the one that I was trying to focus on. But you can see the subject is test flow, and then it's got the start and end date, and then some other stuff. And then here you can see I've got required attendees and optional attendees. And the required attendees did one, it concatenated them, or brought them together. That's not a problem. We can fix that. We're not going to, but we can. But the thing that I don't have is the response, right? And that's one of the requirements. I need that. So that's where we get into the Graph API stuff. So let me drop that link in there. Boop, in the chat.
What are you looking for?
Graph API
There you go.
links.
Yeah.
So put that in there. And then let me drop it here. And so the first time you log into this, or the first time you bring this up, it's going to bring in a little, basically, if you really want to use this thing, you should log in, because that's going to give you the stuff that, the access to your own stuff. And if you've ever worked with what are called HTTP calls, this will start to look kind of familiar. If you've ever worked with Postman or anything that kind of is geared towards those API endpoints, this will be a no-brainer, right? This will be something that is super easy. For the rest of us, right, we might have to intuit some of this. And this is where they've got these sample queries that are great for, getting started, right? And one, I know that my thing is going to have to do with events, and I know it's going to have to be an Outlook, and you can see that it's kind of grouped it by connector. And one of the options is to get my events for next week, or all events in my calendar, right? Or track changes. And so if I just click on one of these, you can see that it does this get call. It uses this URL, right? Again, it looks like gibberish, but we can start to infer things like the start date and time and the end date and time. So maybe I can change these things to get me the information that I want. These dates aren't exactly what I need for my demo, but we can see the results down here kind of already formatted. And so here, we can see actually this meeting. And I don't know if we're going to have attendees. Yeah, here we go. So now I can see, here's my list of attendees. Oops, here's my list of attendees. And then I can see the type, whether or not it's required, right? Because remember, I don't want to check on optional people. And I can see whether or not they responded. So this would be the way for me to access the stuff that I need to access, right? Because it has all of the things that I want. But how do I get that from Power Automate, right? So that's kind of the question. If we go back to my PowerPoint, it's really persnickety. So if we go back to my PowerPoint, you can see that it requires a premium for HTTP, and authentication is a bit of a pain, right? So here's the thing. If I want to do an HTTP call, if I want to hit any API endpoint, the way I would come at it would be normally this, right? So there's this HTTP connector, and I've got all of these different options. Again, as a non-developer, don't be scared, because all of this stuff will start to look familiar, right? I grab the you know, the URI or the URL, and I'm just going to drop it right in here. I'm actually not going to run this, because the thing that is hard with this guy is the authentication. And this is the thing that hangs me up with any kind of API stuff, is how do I get the website to recognize this is me, right? Now, with some of those sites, like the Chuck Norris one, you noticed I didn't have to give it any login information because it's just open. It's just out there. And so authentication isn't a thing. But if I were trying to hit this right now, this URL, it's going to say, well, wait a minute, you're asking for a calendar view, but you haven't told me who you are, and you haven't said that you belong here, right? And so somewhere in here, I would have to put in, you know, either my username, password, or some kind of key that would basically tell Microsoft, hey, I belong here, and I do this thing, right? There's another option over here, which is the HTTP with Azure. And I'm saying it like that because Azure McFarlane's a good friend of mine, and she says that's how you pronounce it. And so what this one does, HTTP with Azure AD, basically takes care of that authentication. I would say get, and then the full thing. Now, the first time you do this, it's going to say, hey, you need to log in, and you would just log in with your regular Microsoft credentials, and it would do this. But I don't know if you guys saw this or not. Let me go back here. I'm going to add it again. HTTP, and then with Azure. And again, this guy requires a premium, right? Which is kind of a drag. And I mean, for most of the folks in Dynamics, you're not gonna have to worry about that. If you're using Dynamics, like premiums there, remember I said, I'm not gonna talk licensing. That's a one little one. So if you got Dynamics, you pretty much get the premium stuff, so you wouldn't have to sweat it. But for the rest of us who don't have Dynamics, maybe we're looking for a way. If you're looking to make a Graph API call, then here's the secret. Go to Office 365 Groups, that connector, and then right here you can see send an HTTP request as in preview, and I can do the same thing in there, and it's not premium, right? So now if I were to run this, in theory, I should get the same kind of gibberish that I got. And remember, this is this query, or this thing that it's sending to the API endpoint, is only asking for my appointments for the next week, right? So this will run.
Do you still have to log into that part? Did I miss something?
Yeah. So
Awesome.
here, let me show you what that looks like. So just like any other connector,
Right,
when I first add it, it would
Yeah.
basically come up with a login screen, and so it's just trying to log in again. So I
Okay,
could
nice.
choose a different account. Yep.
Sweet, thanks.
Yeah, no problem. So now it's going to yell at me, but I will get rid of that. And then, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to add the premium connector with the Azure AD, invoke an HTTP. I'm going to say get, and then I'm just going to drop that URI in there. So this is the one you got to pay money for. And then we'll do the other one, Office 365. Now, again, if you're not a developer, if like some of this stuff is freaking you out, don't worry about it. Just file it away, because there's going to be a point where this starts to make sense. Like not in this call, maybe, but in your journey, and you'll be like, you know what, I remember that, and so I'm going to pull on that. And so what I'm going to get is from this one, I'm going to get a list, and this one I'm going to get a list. And so I'll show you a couple of different things that maybe we can do. Right here, it's just saying, hey, I'm going to log into these things because these are new. I can't remember if I switched after, was it Bastian's question about the logging in?
Yeah,
I switched.
sorry.
I can't remember if I switched. Okay, so here it ran, right? And it gave me a bunch of stuff. And then here, same thing ran, gave me a bunch of stuff, but I don't know if it's the same stuff. So what we're going to do is we're just going to count them real quick and say, so here's that, Fernando, here's the compose. Remember I said you can drop in formulas in there too? So I'm going to drop a formula in there that basically says, tell me how many calendar, which one I want to invoke each press. Let's try that. I think I need to have values in there, but again, I'm not a developer. Don't totally know what I'm doing. The ed method of doing stuff is trial and error and error and error and error. So we may end up, you know, with something weird. But so what length does inside the world of Power Automate is it can do two things. It can tell you, just like in Excel, it can tell you how long a string is. So it'll know, hey, this is a string and here's how many characters it is, just like in Excel, just like LEN in Excel does. Or if you've got an array, which an array is essentially just a list of things, it'll tell you how many things are on that list, right? Now, typically, the array is in the value and not the body, which is the value is the next level down. So I may get an error. Yeah, so here's what happened. Got an error, but that's okay. Don't be afraid. We're going to do something else. Maybe. I don't know. I'm trying to think how complicated. Do I have any questions? No. Okay. So what I want to do is, and I'm going to do this the non-Cody way, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to a previous run here. This is the one that worked. And I'm going to grab this data. So this is the output of the thing. Now, this stuff is what's called JSON, right? And again, I'm speaking way basic. And it's just the formatting of the language for this stuff, right? And the reason that it's getting confused is because I'm telling it, I don't know if you saw the dynamic value that I had in there, but the only thing that showed up was the body, which is here. And what I actually want is the value, right? And so I may have to do some stuff to kind of separate that value out. And that, in the way we do that is you can either do it with an expression, right? Which is pretty easy, or we can do what's called parse JSON. Now I have zero idea if this is going to work, but it should. So we're going to use this step. Parse JSON basically looks at the output of a thing and says, oh, I kind of recognize this. You've told me what this should look like. And so I'm going to break these fields down for you. Okay. So when it says content, it says what JSON do you want to parse? And I'm going to say, I want to parse the body. Now schema, this would seem scary to anybody else because this basically is looking for developer-y stuff that I don't fully understand. But remember, I went back to my previous run, grabbed the output of my invoke and HTTP request, and I'm going to generate from a sample, and I'm just going to paste that in there. And when I click done, you can see that it replaced all of the values with basically the properties and said, oh, okay, I know what to expect now. Okay. And so now when I come in here, instead of doing a length of the body, I should be able to see on my parse JSON all of these other things, right? And if I keep scrolling, there we go. Value is one of them. So that's one way to get at this without an expression. Now, if I just wrote this expression in, I could have skipped that parse JSON step. Like basically there's a way with the expression to just say, show me the value of this thing, but that's not the point here, right? And so we're going to do the same thing here. We want to do parse JSON. Oop. And this time the content that I'm going to be parsing is the body of that guy. Now the schema, remember, I didn't copy the schema from this guy. I copied it from the other one. I'm gonna like put some money on the fact that they're probably pretty close to the same, if not exactly the same. We're gonna find out, like I said, trial and error and error and error, right? And so I'm gonna change this guy to a formula to represent the length of, and so another trick here, you can just start typing the word value up here and parse JSON 2 because I haven't renamed anything. And so now this one is going to show me the length of the value of my HTTP request that has been parsed with my parse JSON. And then this one is going to show me the length of my invoke an HTTP request after the parse JSON using that parse JSON thing. And if we did it right, those numbers should be the same, right? I really hope they're the same. I really hope it works. You know?
Pranam, I don't know if you saw this, asked, is there an equivalent connector for parsing HTML to too similar to JSON? So I can just grab the one item I need from HTML output?
Yeah. Okay.
Like,
so kind of like scraping, right? So you want to go on the site and do something. So you can do that with the RPA, so the Flow desktop stuff. And I'll show you a couple of different ways that you can do that, or at least the methodology that I would use to approach that problem. Okay, so it's yelling at me already. What does it say? Schema failed. It's a new issue. It doesn't know what it is.
You won something.
Oh, yeah, right. Okay,
Like a
so
bounty hunter, you get some money.
yeah, right. So in this case, it expected an object but got a null. I'm not going to, there's a way to fix this. I'm not going to take a lot of time to fix that. But essentially, trust me on this one, the numbers would be about exactly the same. The reason it's not working is because in the results from this, it was expecting something, one of these things that was set up as an object. I identified it. I said, you should get an object here. But in one of those items on the list, that thing was just empty. And so it said, well, wait, I'm expecting an object, but instead I got this empty thing. So I don't know what to do. The fix for that is to find out what thing that was null. And in developers, if you're watching, I'm sorry, but this is how I do it. I just go in and I get rid of the type, right? So whatever that is, I just blow it out. And so now it just, whatever it gets, it's totally cool with. Like I was expecting this, anything really, like very low expectation. So anything meets that, whether it's a string, whether it's an integer, whether it's an object, don't care, bring it all. We're all about the love here, right? Developers hate that because it removes that control, and it's not actual bug fixing. It's, but like I said, this is my hammer. And so everything looks like that nail. And John Liu actually has a very good write-up on that. He calls it this thesis on the parse JSON action, which is a really good article on that. Okay, where did I leave off? We were going to answer Pranam's question, right, on the HTTP stuff. So let me blow these guys out so they don't error out stuff. And so what I'm going to do is, Pranam, if you want to, like, let's say I've got this, right? And then, oops, not what I meant to hit. Sorry, guys. Here we go. View page source. So what I've got here is, all the HTML for that page. At least that's what it kind of looks like. Trying to see if I can copy it. There we go. And then remember, and then I'll go back to my flow. Screeny thing, didn't mean to. There we go. So we'll go back to my flow, and let's do a new one just from scratch. I just have to do that because otherwise, if you try and save an empty compose, it yells at you and says, "Hey, you did a compose, but there's nothing in it." So we're going to create a new one. Skip. And then just do a manual one so I can control it. And so with this one, I'm putting a compose at the top, but not because of the whole release notes thing, but because I need sample data. And this doesn't look like the sample data that I need. This looks like the JSON that I had in the beginning. What I'm trying to do is basically feed the HTML. Oh, there we go. Yeah, it is HTML. Okay, so here we have HTML, right? And this is going to be, my sample data, so that when I do something, we want to see if we can convert it somehow. So there's a couple of different things we can do. And let's say, I don't know, we're looking for a specific tag or something like that. Yeah, Yeah, no doubt. So PowerShell is a good way to do that stuff, and you can call PowerShell actions from Power Automate if that's easier as well. So you can, if you want to automate that kind of thing. But let's take a look and see what kind of HTML options we have. And so here we've got this HTML to text thing, and then we can convert HTML to PDF. The encoding ones you got to pay for, I think. Like you got to have like a little bit. HTML table is a good one, but that's going the wrong direction, right? That's taking, excuse me, an array and turning that into an HTML table. So let's take a look at that convert HTML to text and see what happens with that. And okay, so it basically says what content do you want to use, and we're just going to drop the output of our compose there. And I don't know if it's going to actually do something. Now, Pranam, what we could do too is basically do some string manipulation, right? That basically says, okay, I'm looking for this specific tag, so find me every instance between these tags and then filter that some more if I'm looking for a very specific thing. And then we can kind of go from there, right? Catching up on the go from knowing nothing about JSON to using JSON in your power. Yeah, that's absolutely true. Okay.
Have you read the article? Is that the article you were talking about?
Let me scroll up. Is it the John Liu one that I was
Yeah.
talking about? Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, the thesis on JSON. Yeah. And you know what's funny? Okay, so John Liu, amazing dude, super smart. I played this game where it's Stump John's blog, where basically I have to ask a question, and if he has to like actually type out the answer rather than sending me a link to some article in his blog, then I win. But otherwise, I lose. And so I play that with him. I play that with Peter Veenstra, who has the SharePains log. Like both of these guys are so prolific, right? And so there's pretty much like they've got articles on anything. But in this particular one, like what was the date on that article? Like he wrote this years ago. I've been quoting this article for at least 3 years, and it's still relevant, which blows me away. Okay, so you can see that the HTML text, didn't do a fantastic job, but it kind of got us there. I mean, it took some of the actual text and took away the tags and formatting and stuff like that. But then some of the stuff it was a little confused with here, right? But for somebody that knows HTML, which is not this guy, you'd be able to work through that with some string manipulation using things like, and I've got links to this as well, replace and substitute, the same kind of thing in Excel. There's stuff you can do in there. At the end of my presentation, I've got some links for that. Yeah, 2018. So what are we? We're 4 years later, right? And this thing that John wrote is still relevant. Which, I mean, kudos to that guy, which is amazing. Okay, so what I would do. So anyway, back to original problem. I've got all of this stuff. So I've got my list of events. So now I would just start filtering where I would say, find ones where I'm the organizer, find ones in this date range, um, just narrow it down. And eventually I would end up with a list of meetings, right? So I'm doing a visual, so hopefully you guys can see my picture. So I've got my list of meetings, and then for each of those meetings, I would have my list of attendees. And so I would go through each meeting and say, these are my 4 attendees. Who hasn't responded? I'd find those 2. And then I'd go through each of that list and say, send this person an email that says, hey, respond to my email, and respond to my email person 2. And then we go on from there. So I don't want to belabor that point, but that's the methodology that I would use to kind of get to that point. And it's a little too specific, right, to get into too much detail as far as how to do it. But it's still a good approach for any of that stuff. You just basically, you get your shotgun approach, and you get like, let's get all of the data, make sure that data fits in the confines of what I'm looking for. And then I start using things like my Visual Studio Code and finding the ways to filter it, whether it's, on the date, here's the is organizer flag I was talking about before. So here's another way where I could basically say, where is organizer equals true, you know, things like that. So I would use that to get my list smaller and smaller and smaller until I have just the subset that I want. And then I could do whatever the action is. And in my case, it's send an email, right? Let me wrap up real quick with this slide. So I'll drop these links in the chat too, you know, once we hang up, but if you want to use your phone and grab these. So the top one is a list of all of the functions that are used in the Power Platform. I lean on this a lot because it gives me the syntax as far as what it should look like, and it breaks them out. So these are your date time functions, these are your string manipulation functions, these are your math functions and stuff like that. So you can learn how to translate some of those things that we did in Excel, like what is the syntax, what is the thing that is using it, and also I forget who mentioned it before, but this is your opportunity to kind of get into the Power FX stuff, right? You may want to ignore the middle one because I don't know if that's the same community that Greg and Bastian want to point you to, but the MS Power 8 Power Apps community is that middle one, just kind of a forum that everybody's in there. And then there's also a Power Automate learning path, which is that guy down on the bottom. Okay.
Never enough communities.
Never
Never.
enough communities.
Join
I
them
tried
all.
to paste these codes, right? And I totally messed
Yeah,
them up.
I think
I messed up the second one and third one. So
Oh, no.
okay.
That's all right.
My
You
comment.
can use your phone if you just have with the QR codes, right?
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, you can just hover over there. I'll leave it up there for 5 more seconds. 3, 2, 1. And we've reached the end. So here you can see my Twitter handle and my website. So Twitter is powered by Ed G. If you're into, you know, kitten pictures and whatever, then you'll find me on Instagram with the same handle. And then flyingpolymath.com is my website / blog. I mostly just use it for the blog. And since I started this new job, not a lot of time for that, but I'm trying to get back into it so I can hopefully keep my MVP, right? Fingers crossed. We'll see how it goes. Okay. So there you go,
Well, with
kids.
that, how about we give you a round of applause, Ed? Thank you so much.
You guys.
Everybody,
Yeah.
please come off mute. Use your emoticon to reacting, but would love to hear some sort of clapping of sorts. There we
go.
are.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
There we are. Ed, again, amazing. I do want to give some time for questions. I think somebody had raised their hand.
Yep.
Terrence,
I
do you have
did
a question
promise.
you'd like to ask? Or were you just raising your hand as instead of clapping?
I'm on. Yeah, I was trying to clap.
Yeah, it's like a high five. Okay.
Yeah, we'll do high five.
There it is. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So I'm dropping. Ooh. Okay, so these came out really big, just because I didn't do paste as plain text. Actually, let me try. Yeah, well, Teams won't let me do paste as plain text, so you're just going to get the big power. Power. Every time I say power, I want to say automate, but it's PowerPoint version of this stuff. Okay, so I did promise and ask me almost anything. Are there any questions that folks might have about Power Automate specifically? And then in a general kind of like, I don't know, but I know a guy at Power, anything else on the Power platform?
Can I pop right in?
Yeah, jump in.
I'm Kat Sklar. So I have been struggling with the lack of regular expressions in Power Query. I used to have them in my old ETL tool, and my organization took away my ETL tool and was like, you can do everything you need in Power Query. And I was wondering if anyone has workarounds that do not involve going and learning JavaScript, because that's what I found on the internet so far.
So that sounds like a great question for the Power BI user group next week, right? Because Power Query is outside of me, but I'll lean on Greg, Bastian, those guys, because they probably use that a lot more than I do.
Yeah, my guess is, Kat, you were thinking, Power Automate could move data, or?
It's more for like data cleansing. So I have data that I'm trying to get into Power Automate, and like it has problems, and I want to make sure it doesn't have problems when it gets into. So specifically, the problem I was trying to solve was, is it a valid email address? Like, does it have an @ and a period? And does it not have 9 million other things? And I eventually just wrote like a really long if then special characters thing. But there's lots of other things where I'd be like, is this string of like the right format? and can I like parse by whether it has that right kind of string? And I'm really missing that power.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have to
That-
use a
that's-
combination of Power Query and DAX. If you go to the just type in Power Query MSDN, it takes you to the Microsoft Developer Network. There is so many formulas that you could
Okay.
use. There's a bunch of good Power Query folks in there. Set up something with Greg. Shoot him an email.
Yeah, and you can.
So-
They have Power Query and Azure Data Factory now too.
Yeah.
That's more of a robust like ETL cleansing tool that you could use. And they've been building Power Query more and more into it. I don't know how robust the Power Query part is without having to like do some SQL as well. But that's an option.
Okay, thanks. That's really helpful.
Yeah.
I have a question for you, Ed.
Yeah.
What do you have to do to keep MVP title year and year again?
You know what? The reason I hesitated was because my friend Danesh Nagelkar, he just posted the link, and so I'll get that ready. But basically, how to get MVP and how to keep it is essentially the same. So being an MVP is not necessarily you have to be an expert on the thing. Like you really don't. If you're enthusiastic and you help the community and you do all that stuff. So keeping it, that's how you get the MVP. Somebody nominates you and they go through this process and say, yeah, you've been contributing a lot to the community. So we want to do that. How you keep it is basically all the things that I do, like this and the tweets and the classes that I give and the conferences that I used to speak at, pre-pandemic. I would log those as contributions, and then at the end of the year, somebody reviews those and said, "Yep, those are enough," and you get to keep your MVP. Last year, they kind of gave everybody a pass because it was the first year in a pandemic and nobody was going out and doing stuff. So it really kind of cut back the opportunities we had to evangelize. This year, those opportunities are kind of back, but I'm a little bit sketchy and I'm not in, but most people, I mean, to be fair, a lot of people are still finding a conduit by presenting online, kind of like this. This isn't, like I said, this isn't my comfort zone. I'm better when I can read the room, where I can, interact with people and know how they're receiving what I'm saying. And so I haven't done a lot of online classes. So I really relied on, things like the blog, the podcast, stuff like that. But in order for Microsoft to know about that stuff, I got to tell them, I got to log those contributions, which I have not done. And I always swore I wouldn't be that MVP that waited until, February to log all of those. And it turns out I'm exactly that MVP. So if/when you guys do get MVP, just log the stuff as you do it. It's so much easier. But I just can't find the time.
I've got the experience of tracking my time, which I do pretty much right as soon as I get it done. So
Yeah. If I don't do my time like the day it happens, I'm in a panic because Friday night hits and I'm like, I forgot to do it, and
right,
then it's
exactly.
too late. People are mad.
Yep.
Okay, others?
Anyone else?
Chuck Norris is always a part of my presentation. So,
Who doesn't love Chuck Norris memes or flows?
right. The guy I mentioned before, John Levesque, he recently had a video up where he did Cameo, and he had, I don't know if you guys seen the website Cameo, but basically you can get, I'll be kind and I'll say, famous people, but it's really like, B, C list people doing, whatever, hey, happy birthday, whatever, 30 to 60 seconds stuff. Anyway, he got a bunch of people, including Chuck Norris, to sing the ABCs. And so he strung together a bunch of them where they're doing the ABCs. And so it's kind of fun to watch. I think Chuck Norris is in there. Yeah, he said he was. He was that's how that whole thing started. He wanted to get Chuck Norris to do the ABCs. Okay, so Pranam asked, do you have any tips to maintain a collection of these customized expressions to reuse in future projects? So, no. I mean, short answer, no. What I do though is I keep a link, that top link that was the Azure function ones, the bit.ly/Azure functions, or was that for somebody else?
Imagine it was to you. Right?
Okay, well, if it was for me, I keep the link for the Azure function stuff, and I refer to that a lot. And what I'll do too is I also use Visual Studio Code to write some of those more complex nested ones, because it'll change the colors of the parentheses and stuff like that. The new formula editor inside Power Automate also does that. So if you aren't already using that, that is also in preview. And the way you get to that is, I'll share my screen one more time. Okay, so you can either use, your Visual Studio Code, but if you go to the gear icon up here and then view all Power Automate settings, and then turn on experimental features, then when you've got, the opportunity to use a dynamic value. So I'm just going to drop another compose in here. So when you go to do, formula, you get a much bigger window, right? And it'll keep track of your parentheses so that if you've got something, more than once or twice or whatever, it'll basically make sure that they're lined up, right?
Did they change the IntelliSense on you in the last couple of weeks? They changed it for Power BI, and it's terrible.
Yeah, so they haven't changed it, but in this experimental mode, it doesn't always work, right? So as I start typing length, I find myself in a bind sometimes because the IntelliSense doesn't pop up. And at that point, I'm relying on, my actual non-existent developer skills to do this stuff by memory. So usually what I do is I'll just reload the page or something and it comes back.
Yeah, right on.
Okay. Hey, kids. That's all I got. So I appreciate everybody's time. Thanks for bearing with me on this, and happy to answer any questions if you guys have stuff that pop up.
Thank you, Ed. That's fantastic.
Ed, thank you for answering almost everything. But also for being such a great contributor to the community, here and beyond. And thanks to everybody for being on our first session for 2022.
Yeah, my pleasure.
It's been an interesting ride, and we've got a big year ahead of us. Hopefully we get to do some in-person networking. That will be pretty sweet. But other than that, hope to either see you at the Power BI user group at the bottom of this month, or see you at the second Tuesday of next month for our February session of Power Platform user group.
Nice. All right, guys. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Al.
Have a great night, everybody. Stay healthy, stay safe.
See you guys.
See you guys.
Bye.
Bye.